again, everybody. This is Mr. Everything. I'm coming at you with another one of my campaign recaps. Right? I think this is episode 2. All right. So where did we leave off? Well, we left off. Let's do a recap of episode 1 real quick of what I can remember. Players made characters. They met a one-eyed dwarf in Waterdeep. He said bad things happening up there. So they take a boat to Neverwinter. From Neverwinter, they walk cross-country to this town called Oakhurst. Okay, so now I've got a party of 6. Way too many people. I have a 7th that was wanting to play. Just recently, I had to text him saying, unfortunately, I don't have room at the table. You would be standing in the hallway playing. We're not going to do that. Okay, so and one of my players, which I felt like it was an ultimatum. He said, if I show up and there's no seats, I'm just never going to come back. I didn't like the way he said that. That I don't know if he realized how he presented that, because he's not usually like that. He's usually joyful and jolly, but that came across as like an attack. I would never make him. I would always find a chair for him. He knows that. So I don't. Okay. But he said that to me. Okay, so now there's the 6 players. They made it to this town of Oakhurst, which I put at the foothills of Hotenau, which is where it's supposed to be. They near Thunder Tree and Neverwinter. And okay, so they go in, they find the bar, or the tavern or whatever you want, inn, and the Old Boar Inn, and they meet the proprietor and they ask him some questions, and a lady runs in and says, "Can you save my kids?" Okay, definitely we're going to save your kids. Plus, we're going to find out what this tree that's making these apples that are poisonous or healing, we're going to try to figure out what that mystery is all about. So then they go, cool. The following day, they make the trip to, there was a Squire Knight incident we won't talk about, but then they make the trip to the Citadel. They go in the Citadel, they go through some hallways, and they fight a couple of methods, like a steam and an ice method, and then they find this kobold. And that's where we ended the session. Okay, so the start of session 2 was this kobold was crying, and they coaxed it out of the corner from under the table with his blanket on it. "What's going on, little boy? What's going on?" He's like, "The goblins stole my dragon." Because there was a cage there and it's busted open. "My name's Meepo, and if can you help me? I don't know. They stole my dragon. They stole our holy dragon from our cult or whatever, our guild or whatever they call themselves, their tribe." And the players are like, "We can help you with that. We'll figure it out." And then he perked up a little bit, like, oh yeah. Well, you got to come talk to Isidril, because she'll know what to do. And so he leads them down some hallways where they go and see the Queen of the Kobolds. Isidril. So Isidril's there, and she's like trying to be very dignified, on this crude throne. And but she says, like, "Oh, I see you spoke to Meepo, so you should be and he says you're good people, so what can I do for you? What would you like?" And he's like, "Can you help us out with this we're trying to find these missing people from the village." She said, "Oh yeah, they went to fight the goblins or something, and they've never returned. And so we don't know what happened to them." Were they peaceful? Were they calm? And you go, "Yeah, most of them, they came in, they said hi, and as long as they don't fight us, we don't fight you. We're civilized." And so the hobgoblins, the kobolds, very nice, but very, very protective of their queen. They had a bunch of guards and stuff, but not they weren't being mean or anything. So they even gave him a room and said, "Hey, go hang out in this room. You can take your rest before you go questing into the goblin area to save your people." And so they were like, "Wow, okay." So they went into this room, and the room was full of like spider legs and rats and mushrooms, and it was full of a bunch of stuff that they didn't, dead fish. I don't know what else was in there, but it wasn't dead fish, goblin parts. And so they were like, okay, this must be the pantry, And so they took a short rest there. Some of them got their spells and their second winds and all that, and then they threw some hit dice to get some hit points back, and they said okay, because the Mephit fight. So they said, okay. And then the queen says, Meepo can escort you. He knows the way. And she says to him, take him out the back way. And he's like, okay. So he takes him down this long hallway and leads them into this other area of the dungeon, of the citadel. And they keep asking Meepo questions about, what's this room about? And what's this room about? And Meepo says, I don't know. I've never been over here. Then what kind of a guide are you? He goes, I don't know. I can read Draconic, because believe it or not, this was an old dragon cult citadel, and everything's written in Draconic. And luckily, they've got a guy that can read Draconic, this kobold. And so, okay, so there was this fountain that if the inscription is read out loud in Draconic, it spews this liquid into the basin, right, because it's dried. And they asked the kobold, what does that say? And he just read it out loud to him. And then all of a sudden it started spewing out liquid. And it's like a Kool-Aid, consistency, sticky. And one of them tastes it. And I said, it burns your tongue. It's like a really hot spice. It's like spicy, but you can see smoke coming out of your mouth. And another guy just takes a canteen cup, scoops it up, drinks it. And I'm like, okay, you got like this really bad indigestion. You feel like you got a burp or something all the time. And so he says, well, I'm going to try to spit or whatever. And because he's thinking it has something to do with fire breath. And I'm like, yeah, it's fire breath. So he burns out this gout of flame. And he's like, sweet. And I tell him, yeah, you used one of your charges. So I'm going to try it again. And he does it again. And I'm like, that's 2 of your charges. He had an hour. He had no charges. Okay, so he goes, all right, I can breathe fire. Nice. Okay, so they find this other door that's ice cold. So they try to take some of that liquid and pour it on the door. And I said, as soon as you pour it on the door, it freezes, because it's that cold. And they're like, oh, okay. And then there's a Draconic inscription on there. And they ask him to read it, but translate it to Common, and don't read it in Draconic. And so this kobold is mistranslating it because Common's not his primary language. So he's trying to give them the gist of the thing. And they kind of figured it out after a while that it had something to do with turning undead, because there's an undead skeleton dragon on the door. And, forgot. The half-orc goes to push the door, and this blade comes down and cuts his arms off. But they don't. They don't, because it didn't do enough damage to really cut any arms off. It, like I said, that like hits his armor or whatever, causes some damage on his arm, and then it reset. So then our thief goes up there, and he's a swashbuckler, but he's also got thieves' tools and stuff. And he gets up there, and he's not tall enough because he's a halfling, but he climbs up on top of the half-orc and disarms the trap. Okay, and then one of the players, because remember, everybody's first level, so nobody has turn undead, because you don't get that in this edition of D&D until second level. So you don't get your divine divine, what do they call it? Intervention? Divine, I can't remember what it's called. But you don't get those points until like your turn undead and your extra healing or whatever he's got. You don't get that until second level, where our wizard character is playing a half elf, and through my random character background generator that we rolled through, he got this ability because he was born in a castle of an undead lord, which I said he was born in the kingdom of Thay. Because of that, he has this innate magical ability to turn undead with a 60% chance. And he rolled like a 40. He was able to turn undead on the door, and the door swung open. So I was like, okay, cool. And I was happy for it because I was excited for them to go into the next room. Well, the next room was a bunch of sarcophagus, and it had a table with a candle that was lit and burning. And on the table was a whistle and a flask. Well, when they got close, the half-orc just runs into the room and grabs the whistle, but everybody else was going to investigate the sarcophaguses, and I had them burst open with skeletons and fight the party. And then the players, all took a few points of damage here and there. But then they got this whistle that summoned undead. So they pocketed that, which, okay, it's cool. And then the flask was a flask of fire resistance. And the candle was continual flame. So that was cool. And then they found the secret compartment, which had some gems in it, I think. Okay, and so then they left that room. And then they go to the next room, which is another, it's a long hallway with some cell doors on the left and right. And before they get to the end of the hallway with the cells, they get attacked by rats. And the rats do considerable damage to the rogue. He's down to like 1 hit point. He's about to die. And they kill all the rats. So they figured, okay, we need to take a rest, or we need to do some healing or something, right? And so, but they figured, okay, let's do that in the next room, the room that they could just barely see into. And the room they can see into has a pit trap, 2 pit traps in front of both doors. But those pit traps were forced open and staked in the open position, so you can't miss them, right? And so they step around the pit traps to get into the room, and they find another fountain like the first one, and it also has an inscription in Draconic. And they ask the kobold to read that, and he tries to translate it, fails or whatever. But they notice that it's got like a container of something with a tube that goes to the dragon's mouth of the fountain, and they didn't really mess with that. They go to the next door, which they have to disable the trap, let it close, and then spike it closed so that they get step in front of the door, and they do, and then they could sense, or they smell some decay or whatever on the other side. They open the door and they see this rubble and refuse and stuff like that in the room. And so the monk character goes in, and immediately the players get ambushed by 4 giant rats and 1 huge rat. I mean, it took up 10-foot circle, and it was diseased, and it bites. Like 3 of the rats bite the monk, and he goes to 0 hit points, which that was kind of funny. And then everybody else had to spend the rest of their turns trying to figure out, they were fighting rats, but they were also trying to prevent him from bleeding out because he was making death saving throws. And the cleric doesn't yet have like healing word, so he couldn't reach out and heal him. He had to get over there and touch him. But the rats kept getting in the way, and the giant rat was just biting on the monk. So anytime he got hit, he would lose another death save, right? And so, yeah, it was very dicey for the monk. But finally, they did kill all the rats, and he did spare the dying, so he didn't die. And they found that there was a ranger, one of the 4 party members that went before them was actually a ranger, and the ranger, there was a body of a ranger in that room, and so they looted the body because it had like studded leather, which now their rogue has, and he had I think a bow and some arrows, maybe a crossbow and some arrows or something, and some gold and silver and gems and daggers. He had a bunch of daggers or something. I'm trying to remember, but so they looted the body, and they left the room, and then they went to go. They were thinking about doing a rest, or they haven't done a rest yet, or whatever. But that's pretty much where we ended. We ended with them looting their body, and so they still have the fountain that they have to work with, and they still have the. There's a second door where the tracks of the humanoids go down this other way. So they still have a way to go, basically. Oh yeah. When they were talking to the queen, let's back up. When they were talking to the queen Isandrel, they noticed that she said if you recover their dragon, she was going to give them gifts off of her table, to include possibly the key that she had. And they were like, how much for the key? And she said 50 gold. And the cleric in the party, he's got like a couple hundred gold. He was like, yeah, I'll buy it. So she's like, okay, you can buy it. Give me the 50 gold. And he took the key, and now they have an option where they can go back to the locked door from episode 1 and get through that. Now that they think that's the key that goes to that locked door. They haven't tried it, but they suspect that is what it is. And but they still haven't found the party except for the ranger, and they haven't found the dragon. So that's what they're working on now. All right, guys, and that was the recap, and I'll catch you in episode 3.